So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce Catherine Turocy, who is a remarkable woman with numerous strings to her bow. She's the co-founder of the New York Baroque Dance Company with Anne Jacoby, I should say the American pronunciation, Anne Jacoby in 1976. Um, Catherine is a dance instructor par excellence. She's a choreographer, director, award winner, and yet she hasn't stopped being curious about learning new things. So there's no resting on laurels for her. She's also one of the most gracious, generous, positive, and supportive people I know, a delight to work with and a delight to learn from. It is with great pleasure that I hand over to Catherine Turocy.
Great. Thank you very much, Talitha. It's an honor to be here. Thank you to the Historical Society of Dance for inviting me. And as we have limited time, I'm going to just jump right into my lecture, and here we go. Our first full opera ballet or octa-ballet co-production with the New York Baroque Dance Company and Concert Royal, a Baroque orchestra directed by James Richmond, was at the Schimmel Center in Pace University in downtown New York City, May of 1980. John Haber was the stage director and I was the choreographer. Our New York Baroque dancers performed in the work. The year before this, in 1979, if you had asked who was to be the choreographer, I would have said Shirley Wynn, my teacher and also the director of the Baroque Dance Ensemble, to which I still belonged. I was excited that she had agreed to choreograph our first octa ballet in New York City. It would be a chance to introduce our fresh company of young dancers to my own master teacher. Anne Jacoby was still with us at this time, and she was a former roommate of mine from college and the co-founder of our company. Sometime between accepting this offer and the deadline for the Federal National Endowment for the Arts grant request proposal, which was to pay the dancers rehearsal fees and the choreographer, Shirley broke her agreement. She had been offered to do the choreography for a Baroque opera in Innsbruck over the summer. Alan Curtis, whom she later married, was the conductor. Innsbruck was an opportunity of far greater importance than a New York City premiere of Jean-Philippe Rameau's Pygmalion with a company founded by her former students, even if it was in New York. Meanwhile, the grant proposal was due. What was our solution? I convinced our co-director, Anne Jacoby, that I should be listed as the choreographer in the proposal and everything else could remain the same. I had been receiving good reviews for my modern dance choreography in both the Village Voice and the New York Times. In fact, I had been a professional choreographer since I was 17 years of age, so I had the resume and reviews to submit and the supporting materials, whereas Anne had not really gotten started yet. I had been working in New York City for 2.5 years and was an up-and-coming choreographer. Anne had no record of choreographing, even though she had the desire. She had no reviews and was not yet known, so it was settled. My name would go on the proposal as the choreographer. We did get the grant, I did choreograph Pygmalion, and it was a success. All right, so this is where I am now trying to run my, yes, PowerPoint. There we go. Just a little bit of the review from 1980 by Marcia Siegel. She said, at their recent Schimmel performances with the musicians and singers of Concert Royal, the dancers under Catherine Turocy gave the most complete realization I've seen of this pre-classical period. What you're supposed to hear and see is the music, the line, the rhythm. Every performer is a soloist, and every strand of sound and action can be clearly seen within the overall fabric Richmond, Turocy, and stage director John Haber have produced. The program should have lots more than 3 performances. End of quote. This was truly my first experience of working with a stage director, and I learned so much. John Haber was the first drama coach for the Young Artist Development Program at the Metropolitan Opera and the founder and artistic director of the Eastern Opera Theater of New York. He directed operas in regional houses across the country. His attention to gesture and character development was very helpful. His ability to move the chorus and dancers around the stage with a painter's eye and a musician's ear was impressive. The idea that every performer on the stage supported the action and reacted visibly to the action was an education to me, who had only been involved in ballets or an opera stage direction created by a dancer, not an experienced stage director of traditional opera. He inspired all who worked with him, giving speeches to us before the curtain rose, which helped to not only calm the nerves, but to remind us what a sacred and ritual experience was about to unfold. Most of us were in our 20s and some were fresh from college, so this pre-curtain talk confirmed the importance of what we were about to do. Unfortunately, John passed away later in the AIDS epidemic, and this was our only opera together. Over 40 of our colleagues, including one of our dancers, also died during this period. A very dark time for the arts. Considering the genre of the dances of Pygmalion, I already knew the French noble style, but I had not yet studied the grotesque. I read Gregorio Lombranzi's book, The New and Curious School of Theatrical Dancing, from 1716, to understand the dance of peasants and characters of the Commedia dell'arte. Having already studied the Abbé de Pure and François Menestrier during my trip to France in 1977, I was familiar with the demands of storytelling and the different genres of dance. The score had distinguished a set of dances in the middle of the opera as being a, quote, grotesque. According to the dancing masters, this meant a pantomimic or some kind of parody. What was I to parody in this section when the statue had already come to life and learned to dance? Listening to the music, I thought a parody of the myth of Pygmalion would probably be appropriate. When the people of the village came to greet Pygmalion and discover what all the excitement was about, I assigned 2 dancers to come in as the people with the chorus. They were a couple. The wife henpecked her husband, and her husband was always drunk. In my created story, the husband fell immediately in love with the statue and yearned for his own perfect statue to come to life. Les jeux et les rires, or the games and the laughters, were played by Lombranzi-type characters. 2 were a man and a woman with masks on their faces and masks on the backs of their head. The front of the character was a trickster, and the back was more like a Pierrot character. The other couple was in the nature of Brighella and his wife. These 4 characters witnessed the drunkard's desires, sympathized with the long-suffering wife, and decided to play a trick on the drunkard. Behind his back, they covered his wife with a sculptor's cloth so she could not be seen, and presented her as a statue to the drunkard, who proceeded to teach her to dance himself. You can imagine the pratfalls and the comic swings and slaps as the poor husband is confused by les rires et les jeux and ends up being tortured unknowingly by the fake statue. As the play acting gets carried away, the husband falls to the floor and is hit on the head with his own shoe by one of the commedia characters. Looking very lifeless, the commedia characters are horrified they may have killed him. The wife is guilty that she took part. For a moment, the whole stage is in shock, but alas, he crawls, he moves, he bumps into the knees of his wife, and as they look at each other with relief and love-filled hearts, we see all is forgiven as they embrace. The joy spontaneously leads Pygmalion into his aria celebrating Moore. The masks, these were the masks that were made by Stanley Allen Sherman, and thus began my studies of commedia with Stanley, Rocco Sisto, and Mace Perlman. We also learned some acrobatics and juggling with scarves. The costumes were created for next to nothing for the labor, simply because Marilyn Scoe, the designer, wanted to work in this period. Her detailed research and talent at both design and execution resulted in costumes we are still wearing 40 years later. Yes, they needed new sleeves and some repairs, but they continue to have their charm. What does choreography look like? Mixing the noble dances of the graces as they teach the statue to dance with the rough and tumble, acrobatic, and absurd les jeux et les rires. Let's take a look first at the statue learning to dance. right. Yes. Just going to the next slide. And Talitha, I don't know if you can talk to Lynn about not writing on the screen, but apparently we have some extra graphics. Here I'm just showing you that I did actually write down my choreography, and I was basing it on different excerpts of notations like the Prince Eugene Gavotte. And I have kept these notes, although I have revised my choreography as the years have gone by. Now let's take a look at the parody that I was talking about, the grotesque. And here we go from the same production. All right. Well, our Pygmalion was such a success that it was in demand in Canada and Mexico, as well as the United States. Here's a poster from Mexico City designed by the chair of the dance department at the university there, who was very interested in the Baroque aesthetic. News of my choreography traveled to France, and I was asked to be the choreographer for the production of Pygmalion to be performed at the Opera House in Versailles, with the stars of politics, film, and the arts attending on Rameau's 300th birthday celebration in September of 1983. The stage director was Philippe Lenegal, who ran theater troupes specializing in period performances of Marivaux and Moliere. His actors and actresses danced, so they played the roles of the Graces and the Laughters in the games. What a treat it was to work with the actors. I began to understand more about different timings of emotions and the difference between acting timing and dance timing. A dancer might swim with the music in expressing surprise, for instance, whereas the actor will take a more natural timing, which can work very well because it is in contrast to the musical phrase and stands out more. Howard Crook, a talented young tenor whom we had worked with in New York on several productions, sang the role of Pygmalion. Philippe Herwege was the conductor. There's a little bit of a excerpt from a review from International Magazine. And, quote, it says, delicious costumes, exact copies of 18th century engravings, remarkable ballets of variety, vitality, grace, and elegance. Not a lack of taste and nothing too much. 4 singers with beautiful voices experienced in Baroque exercises and the refined ornaments. Howard Crook, title role with a clear voice, pure and without vibrato, by turns, fine and powerful. Suzanne Gary, delicious soprano, incarnating love with freshness. Sophie Poulain, singing a statue, living the emotions of the love without any affects. And the Ramist gestures flowed here from the source. Only one problem, but of size. Philippe Herwege, who was the conductor, is essentially a choir director and directing an opera without having taken lessons in conducting an orchestra is a bit presumptuous. So this was International Opera in September of 1983. And I only leave that last quote in because that was part of the problems with the field at that time, is that there were people who were conducting in early music, conducting opera, having had no experience. I think that since then we've probably gone beyond that, but this was a little bit of a struggle in the beginning. And I'm just going to jump to talk about our experience with touring Pygmalion. We toured Pygmalion as part of the NEA dance touring program in the East, the South, and the Southwest. And we also performed in California. After the demise of the touring program from NEA, we had fewer opportunities to tour with sets and costumes and a lighting designer, singers, dancers, and orchestra, etc. All this was simply too expensive for sponsors without a subsidy. This is just what's left over from our lighting design. And then, of course, the rehearsal schedule. People are always asking me about the rehearsal schedule. Very detailed, and that actually is an art in itself, getting everything together so that we have no overruns in terms of the union. All right, we did give another performance in 1987 in New York City, and I just wanted to read this from Tim Page. This is from the New York Times. This was one of the most satisfying evenings of musical theater it has ever been my pleasure to attend. Concert Royal and the New York Baroque Dance Company have given us a production that neither the Metropolitan nor the New York City operas could offer. Intimate theater in a small house with a tiny orchestra of period instruments and stylish performances by artists who are also musical scholars. The Concert Royal Orchestra, led by James Richmond, produces the wispy, transparent sound that has come to typify authentic Baroque performances, but it played with such vigor and dramatic force that the interpretations lacked any self-consciousness. Pygmalion is a more solemn work. Indeed, it is shot through with a dramatic urgency that must have been shattering in its time. Rameau is one of those composers, Berlioz is another, who surprise me again and again with the audacious inventiveness of their work. Here again, the singers were first class, particularly Frank Kelly, who played the title role of the sculptor in love with his creation. Mr. Kelly has a high, affectingly sweet tenor voice that he deploys with impeccably artistry and eloquence. He is also nearly unflappable. In the middle of a difficult aria, he backed into some statuary and nearly fell over, but he kept singing, raptly, without a break, even while struggling to regain his balance. Camille King was a gracious, appealing amour, Julia Davidson tender and touching as Safis, and Anne Marios brought the proper sense of ethereal displacement to the vivified statue. Mr. Richmond conducted with both knowledge and invention, while the sets were simple but appealing, with an occasional touch, such as the shower of gold dust that endowed Pygmalion's statue with life. That elevated the proceedings to a near magical level. One hopes that Concert Royal and the New York Baroque Dance Company will take up some sort of permanent residency at Marymount. This is Baroque opera the way it is supposed to be, and there is a vast repertoire to explore. In 1995, both my husband and I received recognition from the French government for our contributions to the fields of early dance and music, as we were decorated as Chevalier in the Order of Arts and Letters, along with other Americans such as Woody Allen and Sharon Stone. In 1999, the Violins of Lafayette, directed by Ryan Brown, asked me to choreograph Pygmalion in Washington, D.C., but they only had money for 3 dancers. How could I make sense of the plot, reducing the 11 dancers I had worked with only to 3? Being inspired historically by the fact that Camargo had played the role of the statue and so had Soleil, I came up with a solution where I would be the only dancer and would play the statue. I asked the soprano singing Amour to be my voice for the short recit, and it was Amour who brought the statue to life. By wearing a mask myself as the statue, the audience would not expect me to sing. This was quite a success, and I loved playing the statue to Jean-Paul Fouchecourt's Pygmalion. Delighted with this new role, I decided to blend the idea of me as the statue and the rest of the characters of the opera as it had been conceived originally. In this version, all the dancers were masked, and actually had gone to masks early on in the middle of the 1980s. When the statue took off her mask in the beginning of the saraband, one truly saw her completing the transformation to becoming human. Later that year, I received the coveted Bessie Award from the New York dance community for my interpretation of Pygmalion and for sustained achievement in choreography. The award ceremony took place 10 days after the World Trade Center towers fell. In fact, they were still burning, and the island of Manhattan was closed below 14th Street. It is difficult to describe the emotion of the New York dance community at that moment. In 2005, we were invited in 2005, we were invited for the opening of a newly renovated Royal Theater at Frederick the Great's Palace in Potsdam. Frederick the Great was a dedicated sponsor of the performing arts, and Marie Salé and her troupe visited this palace several times. This gave me the idea of transforming Rameau's music into a ballet without vocal parts. All the roles would be danced. In my research, I discovered that such works as Le Devin de Village by Rousseau and even The Marriage of Figaro by Mozart had been transformed into ballets, with the dancers pantomiming the music of the recits and then dancing expressive solos or duets to the music of the arias. After asking several musicologists to help me find Chalet's music for her Pygmalion with no success, I decided to do this exactly with Rameau's music. What does this look like? So actually, and my husband eventually with Concert Royal made a recording of Pygmalion, and thus here's the CD. But here we go to the real deal. So this is the recit being danced. We have Jason Melms as Pygmalion, and we have Sarah Edgar standing in the background as the statue. Okay, so you can see we did make a few cuts in the music in order to progress with the story. Let me just read a quick excerpt from the review when we brought it to New York. This is from, and again, the New York Times. It's John Rockwell. Pygmalion was the highlight of the program, partly because Sarah Edgar brought winsome ingenue charm to the animated statue. Her pleasure in coming to life was radiant. Originally set to now incomplete music by Mouret, it used Rameau instead. The two companies have done Rameau's own opera ballet Pygmalion before, so this fits the action neatly. In 2007, I had the opportunity of working with Rebecca Harris Warwick and exploring this music by Jean-Joseph Mouret, which actually was a comedy, and it was originally written in 1734, and it was one of the first. It's actually one of the earliest complete scores to survive for a pantomimic ballet. There's also another pantomimic ballet that was written by Ulrich Graun. That's Graun, and I was asked to choreograph this for a premiere in Potsdam in 2012 for the Sans Souci Music Festival. It was conducted by Werner Erhardt, and it was a lot of fun. And this is a rehearsal, just an excerpt with the ballet, so you can see what a different interpretation and play this was with the same Pygmalion myth.
The overture, the audience is getting excited.
And it's with Justin Coates as Pygmalion and Sarah Edgar as the statue.
And now, I have two workmen bringing on the statue. And the music starts. Oh, here we go.
So in this part, actually, you can bring out the statue, but we didn't have that at the rehearsal. So they would have lifted her onto the platform. Hey, that was rather energetic. This is what they look like in costume. This is taken from the performance. So you can only imagine the dress swinging around. Well, I think this brings us to the end. We continue to do Pygmalion, and sometimes I set it on artists in universities, students in universities. I have kept a little sort of souvenir from the first performance. This is the back of our clamshell when when Amour was lowered from the ceiling of the stage, and it's been with us ever since. So I think I will just stop share at this moment and see if we can answer any questions. Okay, uh, there we go.
At the moment, not many questions in chat. I can't see any questions. But I would like to ask, how did you decide what to do with masks, whether you would have a few dancers in masks or many dancers in masks? What was your thinking when you made those choices?
Well, I've been, working with the masks, since the company was founded. And in my research, it seems that in France, that the dancers were always masked. So that's where, in the original one, we had the comedic characters masked, but we hadn't yet found Jane Stein, who was able to make the more noble masks for our graces. And I found that in the act of wearing the mask, it made the dancer articulate her or his gestures more cleanly. And I also found that it sort of set the dancers away from the singers, because you wouldn't expect the dancers to sing because they were masked. So you sort of watched them as live puppets on the stage, and the audience had a closer attention to their dancing, to the relationship to the music, and to the storytelling. So I found this was like a very successful tool that I explored with the dance company in other productions as well. When it came to the comic Last Dance that you saw, the masks were no longer used as much in France, and the last piece was done by a German composer, so the masks were in outside of France were discarded earlier in the 18th century, and that's why we did not wear the masks for that production.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who has questions? Don't be shy. You can put them in chat. There's one coming in from the Kents. Do we think there is any evidence for dances in the original being more of the familiar notated choreographies that we are familiar with?
No, because the theatrical style or the balletic style was very different from the ballroom style. And so if you'd like to read a little bit of Menestrier or Abbé Dupuy, and if you follow the ongoing discussion in the dance field about the differences between ballroom dancing and ballet, you will come to know more about what this is. And I think this is a very important question, so I couldn't see who asked it, but thank you for asking. No, I don't believe that they would look like those notated dances. The lessons that you saw for the Graces teaching the statue to dance, those lessons actually are taken from notation. So you are seeing a bit of a notation, but it would be like a dancing master teaching his student. Um, there, I didn't show you all the dances. There's a contra dance at the end, which is something that you might recognize because it does use formations from the formal contra dance, but they're always characters who are doing the dance. So you just have to decide who these characters are, why they're dancing, and what is the function of the dance at that moment within the opera. Obviously, if the opera calls for a ballroom scene, you would see some notated dances like you're familiar with.
And another question from Aileen Klarman. She's asking, did you write down all of your choreography or did you notate some of it?
Some of it I notated and some of it I did not. But I do have notes on all my choreography and in notebooks, in shelves all over my house.
And as far as the original choreography, would there have been, sometimes there are notes in the scores, in the musical score. Oh, the dancer moves from stage right to stage left and turns around here or there on this part of the music. Did you find anything along those lines for this particular?
No, not a lot. I mean, when people are dancing, when they're coming in, for the statue, it is indicated when she's stepping down the stairs, for instance. It's particularly in the music. In the overture, you can actually sort of like hear the the hammer of the sculptor, so that's obvious. But there are obvious cues in the music, whether they're written down or not. And for instance, if you're doing Le Devant de Village by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, you will find a pantomime which is very much described. But in Pygmalion, this was not the case.
And Barbara Bowers is asking, will this lecture be available to view again? And the answer is yes. And we will have this on the HDS YouTube channel. It might be a few days to get it organized and uploaded, but it will be there, so you can watch it again at your leisure. Any other questions? Oh, okay. From Virginia Belt. Is there an interpretation of this piece that you as an artist would like to produce, but you haven't yet?
In other words, is there another Pygmalion by another composer waiting to be produced? Is that the question, Virginia?
Well, Virginia, do you want to unmute yourself and clarify what you are asking?
I don't think I'm thinking music-wise. I'm just thinking, is there another version that you'd like to do with 30 dancers? Or is there another, given all the money in the world, or a more, perhaps the same music, but updated story? I don't know. Just it's from an artistic,
Well, from an artistic point of view, for instance, I would love, in order to give that sense of Pygmalion in his studio, I would also like to include like other sculptures there and other sculptors perhaps working on their art. It would be wonderful to produce this actually at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in a sculpture garden. Um, and I think that, really it's the size of the stage and it's the ability of the mechanics of the stage that, fix the scope of the technical side of the work. So yeah, there are many settings that would be fun to work with it. I have to say that it really is, so short. It's only about 45 minutes long. It really is a delight to bring it to life in very, different circumstances. So I never really tire of revisiting it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mhm.
And a question from Anne Day. Were your accomplished dancers all your own pupils, or is there a pool of good Baroque dancers in the USA?
The reason I have a company is that I like to train professional dancers in the style, coming from my perspective and my interpretation of that. So those are the people that I use. I've had over like maybe at this point maybe 50 dancers pass through the company. Is there a pool of dancers? Yeah, I mean there are a lot of good dancers in the United States. But please visit our website, and then you'll see an idea of who's like passed through the company. Yeah, we have quite a legacy there, and I just like the idea of a company, people working together, knowing who each other are, trusting each other, and really developing a concept of what the aesthetic is, and taking that to performances. Obviously, we have, there are the older people in the group, the middle, I've been here with like 6 years, and then the people who just started. So the younger people learn from the older people. As people retire from their active stage work, perhaps they become rehearsal directors or they might coach the other dancers. So it really is important to me to continue the practice of a company. It's a little, at times it's a struggle, but I really believe in the concept of the kind of training and artistic look. It's just like the Beatles had their style, and you could hear their music. It was like, oh yeah, those are the Beatles. Well, I feel that a company also has that idea of style and look, and that's what I would like to contribute to the understanding of that time period.
And we have one more. Oh, I should say that I've put the link in for the New York Baroque Dance Company website, so you can go and check that out. I highly recommend it. One more question coming in from Anne and Paul Kent. Did you sometimes disagree with musicians about the tempi of certain pieces? This is a can of
Um,
worms.
right. Sometimes I disagreed, and I have to say that normally, in Pygmalion at least, I got my way. There have been other operas where, for instance, I was doing an opera with I think it was Hippolyte Récy with John Elliott Gardner, and we, I disagreed with the tempo, and at that point, I just pulled the dance from the opera because it was just not going to be at the correct tempo. Oddly, and his excuse, or not excuse, his reasoning was that the singer couldn't sing it that fast. Well, by the
Right.
time we came to the performance, it actually was up to the tempo that I had originally asked for. So
Oh,
that but sometimes these things happen, and you just have to work it out, and depending on the time period that you have before the curtain goes up, you either rethink it, convince the composer, pull out, or you just do it. But really, I'm pretty adamant about tempi.
does it make it easier or more difficult to have your husband conducting the orchestra?
I have
You
learned
don't
so
have
much.
to answer that.
I have learned so much from him, and seriously, we always negotiate what the tempi is. I've never had, yeah, we always have time to fix it to understand each other's point.
Yeah.
So I truly have benefited from being well placed, as Belinda Quarry told me
Mhm.
long ago. She told me I was well placed, and what she meant was that I married well.
Yes, excellent.
Yes, I agree.
That's great. Well, I think our time is up for questions. Oh, one more from Aileen saying, "Does the company have funding?" That's a good point to bring up.
Um, yes, so I'm the one who writes the grant proposals, and we do have fun. We're like a per project company, so we don't perform. We perform year round, but it's not like 52 weeks. Maybe we'll perform like 20 weeks or maybe 10 weeks, depending on how the year is. And sometimes, for instance, like if we're putting together an opera like Scylla et Glaucus, it starts like 3 years ahead of time. So you get paid in stages. So are we automatically funded by the National Endowment for the Arts? No. Are we automatically funded by anybody? No. The way we work is we get paid with projects, we get paid for teaching, and we have a low overhead. We do have donors, and I thank all the donors to the New York Baroque Dance Company. But it's just a continued struggle, and it started in 1976, and it continues on for 2021, 2022. And we're always, kind of reinventing ourselves in terms of funding to see how we can do collaborations. I highly recommend collaborating with an orchestra or a theater company, or just another nonprofit organization to cut your costs in half because they'll match the other half. And in fact, those collaborations artistically push one to new heights. So it's always a good idea. But yeah, it's a struggle. Good luck to anybody who's using.
Well, you're such an inspiration to the rest of us with all of our uh, goals and objectives. To see somebody who has really got out there and accomplished so much, it's just absolutely glorious to watch the fruits of all your labors. And I would like to remind people that uh, on Labor Day in America, but just the first weekend of September for the rest of us, Catherine is going to be teaching. This is the third in a series of workshops, but it's not necessary for you to have been to the other two, on Baroque dance notation. And this is specifically on the modifications, Rameau's modifications on Beauchamp Foyer dance notation. So that is over the weekend, the 4th and 5th of September. It's in the late afternoon, early evening for us in the UK, but we've timed it for 3 hours Saturday, 3 hours Sunday. We've timed it in such a way that people across the ocean can also join us via Zoom. So it's part of the Working with the Sources series, where you really get to grips with what the original notation looked like and bring it to life with your interpretation. So I'm myself really looking forward to that, and we would like to have as many people sign up as possible. And then I should also say, well, I'll say thank you to you, Catherine, because it's just been a sheer delight. And we look forward to your returning to work with us again. The next Historical Dance Society online lecture for September, that's the 15th of September, another Wednesday evening, 7 p.m. In UK time. I'm actually going to be doing that one. And let me just double check how I ended up with, yes, here's the title as it is on the ticket. The Essence of Efficient Teaching and Learning Historical Dance. So some tips and tricks on how you can communicate with students, and if you're a student, how you can get the most out of taking workshops and summer courses, etc., when you are working with dance instructors. So I hope that you will sign up for that. The Eventbrite link should be available fairly soon if it isn't already. So